into our next panel, which is Revolutionizing Connectivity and Interoperability in Africa. And our esteemed moderator is Mr. Gabby Asare Otchere-Darko. He is the executive chairman and founder of the Africa Prosperity Network.
Good morning, Your Royal Highness, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I think my job is pretty easy because I have a panel of experts. I'm going to try and make it conversational. So I'm going to start inviting the panelists. May I start with the CEO of MTN Benin, Uche Ofodile. Uche is a senior business leader with expertise in building businesses in emerging markets. With more than 15 years in CEO, CMO, and CCO roles, she has been the driving force behind transformative change in blue-chip multinational companies. Today, as the CEO of MTN Benin, Uche is driving commercial growth and cultural change in a challenging, evolving industry. Known for harnessing the power of people to move businesses forward, Uche injects enthusiasm and accountability into an organization to create engaged, high-performing, and cohesive teams. A thought leader on women leadership and technology, business entrepreneurship in Africa, Uche frequently serves as a keynote speaker, panelist, and company spokesperson in forums worldwide. Welcome.
Thank you.
Forgive me, but there's gender insensitivity with this panel. There's too many women. My next panelist, it's a lawyer. Don't be scared. Lawyers we are nice people, so long as our clients pay us. Zelda Akindele is a partner at Templars. Now, Templars, if you haven't heard of Templars, then you should hear of them. It's a leading law firm in Africa. In fact, their senior partner is actually a role model of mine. And a leading finance and M&A lawyer, she is. She has a fintech team at Templars. She holds a Master's of Law in Banking and International Finance from the LSE, that's London School of Economics, and is admitted to practice law in England and Wales and Nigeria. She was previously a deputy executive on the legal team of SaanaCapital, formerly UBA Global Markets, and began her career in the finance practice of international law firm Clifford Chance LLP in London and Milan. Zelda has 20+ years of experience, but she's still pretty young, advising on Nigerian and international commercial transactions. She regularly advises private equity and venture capital investors, investee companies, founders, private capital providers, financial institutions, corporate borrowers, and project sponsors. In the last 10 years, her practice has extended to the fintech sector, where she advises some of the largest global fintechs like MasterCard, PayPal, American Express, Google Pay, Amazon Payments, Stripe, Checkout.com, etc. Her experience in this regard includes product structuring, regulatory compliance, and market entry advice. She is one of a handful of female lawyers recognized as an IFLL 1000 woman leader in the Nigerian market for 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023, and I believe soon 2024, and ranked as a leading lawyer by Chambers and Partners and Who is Who Legal, Nigeria. She's passionate about empowering young women for professional roles and regularly acts as a mentor to young female professionals. And I must add, young male professionals as well. Welcome. I want to skip the other woman and then see if I can introduce a male. I understand that he had challenges with his luggage. I don't know if he's here with us. Is he? He is. Excellent, excellent. Sitting in the crowd, he tells me. Okay, so we have Ihi Binitie, Executive Director of Bridge Technologies. Is he here? Please. Ah, we can see you managed to find some clothes. Yes. That's good, that's good. Ehizogie Binitie is a distinguished engineer and tech entrepreneur, having served as the founding CEO of Bridge Technologies. He currently serves as its global policy lead and director of government relations. He holds a US patent in AI and is a foundry fellow at MIT's Legatum Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. He has over 20 years of experience leading projects for global tech giants like Google, Intel, and BBC. At Bridge, a Pan-African fintech backed by Acuity Ventures and SaanaCapital with the support of the AFDB, he works closely with central banks, fintechs, and mobile money operators to establish a Pan-African currency exchange, facilitating cross-border trade in local currencies. Before founding Bridge, he co-founded Runcard Solutions Limited, where he played a key role in expanding its operations to 22 countries across Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. He is a passionate advocate for a simpler, faster, interconnected, and prosperous Africa, with a focus on expanding opportunities for Africans everywhere using technology. Thank you and welcome. Now, the last of the panelists is a banker. And not surprisingly, is a woman. And this is Dr. Diane Karusisi. I'm not too sure if I have to say that she's a local. She's the CEO of Bank of Kigali, the first Vice-Chairperson of Rwanda Bankers Association. Dr. Karusisi is the CEO, of course, of Rwanda's largest commercial bank. Now let's clap for her. There's something that Rwanda is doing right that the rest of Africa should emulate. How they're getting women to overtake men. And we welcome that. She spearheaded the bank's digital transformation and played a pivotal role in expanding the BK Group into general insurance, investment banking, and technology. With a strong background in economics, she has held prominent positions at the National Institute of Statistics and the Office of the President of Rwanda. Dr. Karusisi also serves as a non-executive director on several boards, including the Rwanda Development Board and the University of Rwanda. Her exceptional leadership fosters growth and innovation, earning her high respect in Africa's financial industry. It says Rwanda, but I will expand it to Africa. So welcome, my panelists. We're going to discuss interoperability. And you may ask yourself, what is that all about? I believe Mr. Gayad Mensah gave us a good contextual, if you like, foundation for the topic. Essentially, what it means is that, as far as we are concerned, if we're going to build a single market Africa, we must be able to trade among ourselves. Because when you look at trade in Africa, it's much lower as compared to other regions or continents, whether it's the EU and Asia or America. So we need to do more. And we are seeing that Africa is way ahead when it comes to innovation regarding the use of things like instruments such as mobile money and the rest of it. We are way ahead. So we believe that what is important is how do we connect these various, if you like, payment systems on the continent, mobile money systems on the continent, so that a fashion designer in Benin can sell to the market, whether in South Africa, Ethiopia, Morocco, or wherever. So that's the conversation. Last year, we were told by AFDB that for 2022, mobile money transactions, the value of it was about $836 billion in Africa. Should I repeat that? $836 billion mobile money transactions across Africa. And this is without the needed interconnectivity across the continent. So just imagine what it would do to our GDP if it's bigger. We are here also focusing on women. As Gayha told us, women, according to IFC figures, women make up, I believe, about 50% of SMEs, which make up about 90% of the economies or economic activity on the continent. And 80% of employment in Africa is driven by SMEs. We believe that interconnectivity will assist greatly SMEs, particularly in intra-African trade. So I'm giving each panelist 2 minutes, maybe 2.5. Uche complained, maybe 2.5, maybe 3 minutes, okay? To tell us in what way do you see interoperability important to Africa's payment ecosystem? Seems to be a lot of English, but I understand they understand it. Please, let's start with the Uche.
All right. Thank you. Even though I think you've already answered the question. So at the heart of interoperability is this thing that we talk about so much, which is financial inclusion. Why is financial inclusion important? You know, the ability for everyone to have access. Financial inclusion leads to financial independence. Financial inclusion leads to greater economic activity. So at the very heart of it, it's not a technical term, it's a must-do. And as we've been talking about One Africa, this is at the core of it. So you'll see pockets of it happening in different countries. And we find that in countries where we start to see policies around interoperability, whether it's through the operators, through banks, through government, that there is a significant increase in usage. So it's good, we know it works. But how do we get it across the continent? How do we ensure that we have policy alignment across different countries? How do we ensure that it serves its purpose, which is to bring more women into the formal sector, more young people into the formal sector? Because today, many of the businesses are being driven by very young people, and they need to be able to have access to markets across Africa. Just recently, I was telling this story earlier, where we really look at how mobile money in Benin Republic, mobile money in Benin Republic is growing at very high double-digit growth year on year, transactions even higher. And so our goal is really to ensure that every single person in Benin has access to this. One of the things that we started to focus on is to move beyond basic services into more advanced services. And we introduced something called GEMA, which is a lending product. So we were in the market a couple of weeks after introducing this product. We're in the market, and we met with a market woman. We were just talking to her. Have you heard about GEMA? Are you interested in this? And she said, explain this to me. And we said, it's a lending product. On your phone today, you can have access to funds for your business. I mean, she almost started crying because she was saying to us that she wasn't clear about how she was going to pay for her goods to sell the following week. And this product suddenly, just that day, gave her access to funds. So payments, financial inclusion, hugely important. And we can make a direct link between the increase of the usage of mobile money and like, so I'm not just talking about MTN, fintech in general, fintech services in general. And we like to believe that we're a big part of the story of the economic growth in Benin Republic that we've seen over the last few years. It's important. And for countries like Benin Republic, and I would assume also Rwanda and other smaller countries in Africa, we focus a lot on Kenya, Ghana, and Nigeria, the big, heavy brothers and sisters. It's important for them to have access to customers outside of their country. Today, Benin, Benin is a country of 13 million people. And so really, if you think about it, they need to have to find ways to expand their customer base. And they have to do it beyond Benin. They have to look at Nigeria, they have to look at Ghana, they have to look at South Africa. And so the idea of interoperability opens up doors for them and expands the pie, it expands the market. And that's why it's so important.
Thank you very much.
Did I use my 3 minutes?
Yes, you did. You overused it by 10 seconds. Zelda, still on the same topic, but I want you to look at it from, if it's that important to the economic ecosystem of building an intra-African sort of market of 1.4 billion, what do we need to do, maybe regulatory-wise, to make it happen?
Okay, so good question, because despite what, non-Africans think, Africa is not a single country. We're made up of over 50 independent states, and so we do not have a single legal and regulatory framework, right? So when we talk about interoperability, how can we achieve that given the multitude of financial systems and legal and regulatory systems across the board? Now, before I go into that, I want to just kind of contribute a little bit to the conversation around why is it important first.
Focus on that. We can come back later.
Well, it's just in making a case for a legal framework that can work across Africa, we have to understand what Africa stands to benefit, right? And when I was thinking about today's discussion, there was one figure that kept ringing over and over in my head, and that's $5 billion. And I'm not sure if anyone here knows the significance of that number, but in 2022, when the Pan-African Payment Settlement System was launched, that's the number we heard is lost in transaction costs annually within Africa.
Lost to what?
Right?
Lost
in transaction costs. So that's how much Africans pay in cost, right? For making payments within Africa.
Who benefits?
Right? So that's what I was going to say. Who benefits? At the moment, unfortunately, when you want to make a payment, right, we have an intermediary currency. And the currency of choice at the moment in Africa, as it has been for decades, is the US dollar. So when you make a payment from, say, your business in Uganda to South Africa, you go through an intermediary bank, you send your US dollars, it comes back. There's a cost to that each and every single time. Now, if we're able to achieve interoperability, what it will give us is a clear system for payments, clearing, and settlements, right? That will mean instant payments. It will mean pre-funding. It will mean net settlement, right? But how do we achieve that with all of these diverse legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks that we have? Now, one of the ways, obviously, as I already mentioned, is the Pan-African Payment Settlement System that I talked about. It's an incredible innovation. I have huge expectations given the potential around it, right? And it's the brainchild of the AFTA Secretariat and Afro-Exim Bank and the West African, monetary institutions. Now, under the AFTA framework, what can then happen is that all of the African countries in the AU that are signed up to it are then able to, they're able to bring in that system within their own local regulatory systems, right? And then we have a harmonized system for implementing, right, interoperability for payment systems across Africa. So really, what is it about? It's about cooperation. That's how we achieve it. It's not by saying we must have one single uniform law, but it's by allowing a flexibility of national laws that allow it to come in. So at the moment, if we look at that as an example, perhaps, we have 13 central banks that are in the system. We have about 51 commercial banks. This is across Africa, and 5 switches. And they're able to do that because their local regulatory frameworks allow them to connect to the system, right? So it's that cooperation, it's that understanding of what it can mean for intra-Africa trade. That's really how we kind of get to that.
Thank you so much, Zelda. Now we move on to Ehi. I think recently, about 2-3 weeks ago, in Accra at the 3i Summit, you launched the Bridge X solution. How does that feed into the question, as in the relevance of interoperability to Africans doing business across Africa.
Thanks, thanks, Gabby, and lovely to be here. I think it's a really exciting discussion. So fundamental to payment interoperability is actually a currency problem. And you have 41 different monetary zones and different regulations as to how this money moves. There's currently no framework for direct Africa to Africa currency exchange. And the default right now, I mean, nobody wants to admit that publicly, is actually Bitcoin. So the framework which gets Africa moving. So make no mistake, Africa trade is happening. 1.5 million shoes shipped out of Igbo land in Nigeria, moving right up the coast, distributed into West Africa, hides coming from East Africa back into West Africa as meat, fabrics, cloth. Africa trade is alive and well. The problem is that it's very expensive, 7 to 15% transaction costs in moving things about. And beyond the financial inclusion problem, it's an economic inclusion problem. So for the guy who sits in the Niger Delta or is making handicrafts, there's no way he's getting into the current financial system the way we think about it. His identity is not right. He doesn't have an address you can go to prove him. He's not getting into any bank. So there has to be a rethink about how we create large, scalable, highly fluid markets which fit in within the context of a broad regulatory system and actually work. So today, it's possible to send money from Uganda to Nigeria via Momo and to do the same from South Africa to Nigeria and expanding and growing. And what we find is that the real barrier has been a currency framework. So we have worked with central banks in establishing a framework for and the technical capacity for local currency exchange directly without having to go through the US dollar. And we think this is fundamental to an intra-Africa trade. It's complementary but different to the work PAPS is doing, which we sort of see as more like a central switch. We believe that working collaboratively with the private sector, there are opportunities to create large-scale, high-speed, peer-to-peer, low-cost networks, which are derivatives of the existing mobile money networks, which work excellently well and just need to be enhanced. We don't need to sort of recreate those. Interoperability at a mobile level, I think, is one of Africa's greatest inventions. And what we need to do is see how we scale that so we take economic inclusion to everybody, I mean, at the base level.
Thank you so much. Now, Diane, we essentially, they have a mobile money IPS, which is essentially the platform that allows interoperability within that zone. Then you have the bank IPS as well. I think what is required is a cross-domain IPS, where you can have bank to non-bank sort of transactions. What is happening? Let's use maybe Rwanda as an example. What is happening here? Because we know there's a lot that's happening here. What is happening here that can be replicated across the continent?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's a very exciting panel, but also a very great conversation that is being had here. So I'll start with the why. I think we all agree that talent is sort of uniformly distributed. There's no, I mean, I actually believe there's more talent on the continent than elsewhere. And the problem is opportunity. Opportunity is clearly not equally distributed. And this conversation is really about, providing opportunities to the talents, that we have on the continent. And to your question, we want a fashion designer in Benin to trade across border and sell, dresses in South Africa, in Kigali, etc. And for us to provide opportunity, we need to start with, financial inclusion. I think this is how you get people into the market economy. Interoperability now offers opportunities to trade across border to actually grow. And I believe this is all we're talking about. We really want to provide opportunities for people on the continent. And what I believe, will, exponentially increase these opportunities is partnerships. Yeah. So I'll talk about some partnerships that we've done in Rwanda that I think can be replicated across borders. Banks here, it's actually a regulatory obligation, have to fully integrate with telcos and enable push-pull at close to no cost. So I can send money to my mobile wallet. And actually, when it's my bank account to my mobile wallet, there's no cost, it's zero. And when someone sends money from his wallet to his bank account, it's again at no cost. So the regulatory environment has really, toned down the barriers of bank to wallet transactions. So because of that, we are now able to have partnerships with telcos. And I'll talk about one product that we worked on recently. We worked on an asset finance product. So typically, as Bank of Kigali, I'll be able to provide a loan to someone who's not even known to me. He's not my client. But because I have this agreement with the telco, we can share the data. I'm able to score these people. So we can provide asset finance. You want to buy a smartphone. And we started with smartphones. We want people to be digitally included. Because, by the way, I think digital technology has really enabled Africans to be on the global stage and to have these opportunities that you're talking about. So I believe everything we want to see happening in the next couple of years is within reach because we have digital technologies and innovations that come with it. We have now inclusion. In Rwanda, it's close to 100% financial inclusion. It's 96%, I think, in the latest numbers. So you have digital technology, you have financial inclusion. Now, we now need to work on products. What are the right products, relevant products to enable people to grow? And I bank on partnerships with telcos, with fintech, with anyone who can come up with a brilliant idea that can help me grow my business, offer opportunities to people. And this partner will also have opportunities to grow the business. So I really believe, I'm actually very bullish about the continent. I believe many of the building blocks are there. It's right about us coming together, right political will, and just to push some buttons and things will happen.
Thank you so much. I was warned by Nkuru that I should make it a conversation. So I need to make it a conversation. The last 13 minutes we have. Yeah, we had 15 seconds to it, don't worry. So I'm going to have a conversation, and I'm going to open it up. We've heard about PAPS, which is the Pan-African Payment Settlement System. We've heard of BridgeX. We've heard of all manner of things that are being created. Now we are talking about how we even achieve continent-wide mobile money interoperability. There's a conversation, there's a meeting in Ghana, July of this year. It's a mid-year AU summit. All the African heads of state will be there. And one area that we're pushing for the focus to be on is how to achieve continent-wide interoperability. We hear Dan saying political will. We hear he's saying policy framework. We hear the similar thing coming from Zelda, coming from everywhere. Uche is talking about how we can empower the woman on the market so she can sell her things across border. What would you want, Zelda? How do we get the politicians, especially in July, if you have opportunity, what would you want them to focus on and get done so we can trade among ourselves as Africans?
Thank you for asking me that. And I could actually use up all of the time, but I won't.
Just be generous to the rest of us.
But it's actually vitally important that we get the politicians and the policymakers taking note and understanding this, right? And the way for them to understand it is two things. One, it's the benefits to every single economy in Africa. If we are serious about growing African economies and, more importantly, strengthening African currencies. So what you're talking about, this over-reliance on the US dollar, I'm sorry, maybe that's not a very PC thing to say, but it's a reality of where Africa is. If we want to grow, we have to strengthen our own currencies and we have to grow our economies. And intra-Africa trade is key to that, right? So what do I want from the policymakers and the governments? I want them to facilitate those policies and that framework that will allow the interoperability, right? So for example, why do we only have 13 central banks that are signed up to PABS? How many of them are looking at your system, right? These are conversations they have to have. These are conversations that have now become mandatory in this global world. So those are the kind of things that I'd want them to be looking at that AU meeting, for example.
I'm going to say something that, look, there's been a lot of progress, but I think in recent years we're also seeing some regression, and it's a conversation around taxes. So I think up until a couple of years ago, we would have seen in many countries, 40, 50% in terms of growth of transactions and growth of users in terms of digital payments. In some countries, there's been taxes put in place on fintech transactions, digital transactions. There's some conversations happening in some countries today. And where those taxes have been implemented, you see an immediate drop in terms of people, making use of digital channels. So first and foremost, I think there has to be this acknowledgement that going in that direction actually sets in some regression of progress that has been made over the last few years. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is what has already been discussed in this panel, which is around how do we get not policy assimilation, but flexibility on KYC as well, because I think some of the requirements are quite difficult and challenging. And I think the third thing is how do we put in place something like a digital sandbox in each of the countries or across, from a central point where innovation is really encouraged and that we can start to test a lot more of the things that many of the young people are doing and that we can implement very quickly. Yeah.
Thank you. Diane, and before you come in, I hear the central banks have an issue. Some of them think that if we have this interoperability, they will see more currency flight. And yes, I've heard that in a few countries I don't want to mention, because they think that maybe they'll see more money leaving their country. So that talks about the currency swap sort of platform. So you come in. How do we achieve it? How do we get the regulators and all of them on board?
So I think, first of all, the problem of money leaving the country is not a question of interoperability. I think it is a question of attractivity and opportunity in the country, probably regulation, but it's not really a problem of interoperability.
Doesn't it affect it in terms of the currency?
I mean, if I don't have attractive businesses or products here, of course, my people will look for other products elsewhere. It's an open world.
Excellent.
So what I want to say is, just like we are working on PAPs with these settlement platforms and everyone, connecting or integrating with PAPs, I think we need to have a conversation around data, because I really believe that if we are able to share data in a safe manner, in terms and conditions apply, we are able to unleash so many business models we can't even imagine. Because today, the partnerships I was talking about actually about sharing data. Because if I have a client who is also Uche's client, she has some information, I have some information on the client. This person probably pays water bills, electricity bills, buy groceries, etc. When these payments are digital, you're able actually to have a very good understanding of the livelihoods of this person and able to offer, personalized products. So I think the day we will be able to say we have a central repository of all the data that innovators, companies can tap into to design the right products for people, I think we'll see tremendous growth.
Hey, data. What about these identity KYC passports? We don't seem to have a common one. How do we achieve that?
I think, hello? Yeah, so cyber and risk are big problems in the financial sector right now. I think for every bank, you're more worried about a hacker than you are about a thief breaking into your bank. Top priority is how do you keep that out? And I think at the heart of that conversation is KYC. Every country, I think, with a mobile network in Africa today has an identity system linked to that, which tracks people. The challenge is moving that across borders is still problematic. So how do you take your NIN from Nigeria, and what does that mean in Ghana or Benin? Or how do you passport your ID from Rwanda and take that to South Africa or Ghana? So KYC, the identity frameworks, at a technical level, I think sort of some of the things we need to tackle at policy. What does AFTAC mean for Pan-African KYC, and how is that managed? How is data shared so that when you have bad actors in one country, how is that data federated? The US has OFAC lists, you have sanctions lists, you have places in which you can harmonize and keep out bad actors from the system. We'd love to have that sort of framework here. And also on the innovation side too, I think regulatory and policy still remains the biggest barrier to Pan-African scale for innovators. So you have a good product in Benin, getting it to Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya is almost impossible. So harmonized regulatory sandbox. I know the AFDB is big on this and have been championing initiatives around that. So these are some of the areas I think the work, these are the technical things I think need to go into the work we need to see from our politicians, and real key decisions around areas like this.
I heard Dangote saying that he needs visas to get to
35 visa.
35 visas. Thankfully, I didn't need a visa to come to Rwanda yesterday. And I hope I don't need one to get to Kenya tonight. And really, so how do we push for that single document? That single document that allows every African, it's really, really important that we move away from these colonized boundaries that we have and have a single document that, as an African, you can move from one country to the other. How do we achieve that? I mean, how do we push for that? Because at the end of the day, it allows the KYC to be simplified. Is that not the case?
Yes, if I may.
Yes, you may.
To be frank, I don't think a single document is practical.
Why not?
I don't think it is practically possible, just given the diversity of legal systems that we have across Africa. What I think may be more practical and is more achievable in the foreseeable future is what Ehi was talking about, which is passporting, right? Which is that recognition of the document that is acceptable in your country, in another country.
There's an AU passport, but it's just limited to a few people.
Yes, no.
And a lot of them are politicians.
What I mean is not just a passport, but what he's talking about in terms of we have means of identification in every country in Africa, right? Passporting that, meaning that means of identification in your country should be able to transcend the border, yes, right? And that is actually low-hanging fruit because most of the African nations have now latched onto this idea of a unitary identification.
I still don't want to accept that because we should have a single AU passport. Is there any reason why we shouldn't have it? Is there a reason?
In my view,
please go ahead.
My humble view, I think that
most humble view.
I think that in order to surmount the political and cultural obstacles to achieving a single AU passport, we will end up shooting ourselves in the feet and not achieving what we need to achieve in quick time.
Or what we can achieve.
Or what we can achieve in quick time, right? We will get bogged down in the politics and the cultural considerations of a single AU passport.
In West Africa, we have the ECOWAS ID.
Yes.
So why is it not possible to expand that?
So if I may jump into the fray here. So I think where we could start from. So let's look at where we start from and then we can explore where we could emerge. Where we could start from is data sharing. So there's nothing that stops the national ID system of Ghana being integrated with the national ID system of Nigeria, of Kenya, etc., so that if you need to verify ID, there could be a single lookup. Okay, so we may not get to a unified passport first, but can we have the infrastructure which harmonizes that, agree on data exchange standards, and have a simplified framework where anybody, and today the entrepreneurs are doing that. They're reg tech companies, they're companies who've made this their business, but it's not at a point where governments are yet adopting this.
We have 5 seconds. Yes. We have 5 seconds. Actually, it's gone to 0. I understand we have time for questions, but as from the conversation this morning, it appears to me that mobile money interoperability may be the fastest way of achieving interoperability, as opposed to all the other payment systems. Am I right? I just want yes or no from all the panelists, and then we have some questions, starting from Diane. Yes.
I strongly believe this.
Zelda?
Absolutely.
Uche?
Of course, it's
Uche has to be, of course.
Of course.
All right, so let's put our hands together for this amazing panelists, gender bias panel. Any questions from the audience on the topic of achieving interoperability across the continent? Yes.
Hi, my name is Innocent Isiche.
Okay.
I am a senior policy advisor to Paystack. We do have a license here in Rwanda and a few other African countries like Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya. And when you're talking about interoperability, one of the key issues I've seen is the fact that, for example, there's a huge compliance cost in terms of complying with different regulations across, the different central areas where you're licensed in. So I think there's a need to, a question I would like to hear maybe from Ehi, for example, what are your thoughts in terms of, I do believe this idea of a passport that makes it easier. So if I do have a license in Nigeria, there are fewer protocols I have to observe if I come to Rwanda or I go to Namibia, for example. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Thank you.
Okay. So I think the first thing is, for most of the central banks I've engaged with, the first consideration is financial stability. So everybody's thinking, and the fear index right now is high. So whether you're from Nigeria or Egypt, actually Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Kenya are in the same WhatsApp group. The countries, their currencies move at the same pace, literally. So
is it Safaricom or MTN?
All of them, just same complete WhatsApp group. And the fear index right now is off the charts. So everybody's dealing with not just the effects of macroeconomic policy or fiscal policy or monetary policy. I think there's right now a challenge of people gaming the system. So just coming to your point on, I'll land pretty quickly. And this is one of the biggest barriers to innovation, because the fear index is really high. Now, I think the start point is a harmonized sandbox framework, so that you can put innovation in one place and we can quickly test whether or not it meets the financial stability criteria across board. Because the biggest challenge with policy is unintended policy consequences. You take one decision and there's a feedback loop which blows your policy completely out of the water. And given the dynamics of African currencies versus the US dollar today, we need to have a safe framework for testing innovation and then quickly deciding what to scale, what's beneficial or not. So I'd say the first step, before we even get to harmonized regulatory, is harmonized testing. Because every government is still very, like I said, the fear index is extremely high now. And if we could start out by saying, can we all test these ideas in a safe space which everybody's looking at with the same metrics? What are the 5 or 4 different metrics which central banks tend to view innovation from? Are these clear to the innovators? And is there a systemic way, Pan-African wide, for doing this?
Thank you. Thank you. Any take from any of the panelists?
Just to add that another very significant consideration for a lot of the central banks is AML, right? The money laundering vulnerability of this interoperability is of significant concern. And a lot of the time when you speak to central banks and government officials, that's what they want to say. So when you talk about gaming the system, that's one of the things they're very concerned about is we don't want to provide an avenue where it is so easy for the proceeds of crime to be laundered throughout Africa, right? So when we're thinking about how it is that they can address it, there absolutely has to be some harmonization of the AML regulations. And it's, it's a key starting point in that.
Another question?
My name is Nkechi Obi, and it's not so much a question, more like, okay, it's a question. Who is midwifing, ensuring that we all have everybody playing in the same sandbox? Because we all have our different sandboxes now, and we're all in silos. Who's responsible for bringing everybody into this unified? Because that is the biggest problem in Africa. Every single sector, let me just use my sector, sports sector, too many people doing different things. No one getting everybody to sit in the room, drag everybody, let's sit in this room and let's do this. No one forging through the forest, cutting down the trees so everyone else. Isn't that the AU's responsibility? I just want to know, because I never see the AU in the room whenever these conversations are going on. Am I the only one that feels that?
I think you make a very good point. So we have 4.5 minutes. We throw it I'll start with Uche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely would say the AU is there. It may not always be in a public forum such as this. I think there have been a couple of issues, at least from a telco industry point of view, that have been risen with at the AU level. So they're listening. I think there's a lot more that they can do in terms of really being in the center of many of these conversations, as you've mentioned. And I also just want to add that I think the private sector has a very huge role to play as well in influencing some of these conversations. If you look at a company like MTN that's sitting in 13 to 15 markets across Africa, they have we have a unique opportunity to try and harness these conversations across various governments. So and we're beginning to do that. You would have seen recently our group CEO speak to this. So the private sector also has to stand up and not only say, this is happening to us. How do we also proactively, drive discussions around regulation? Many of our markets have data, as was mentioned earlier, and using that data to be prescriptive about what regulation could look like in the future is really important as well. So private sector, AU, very much on board.
Diane?
Thank you. I think, we talked about it. In my view, AU has sort of delegated Afreximbank
Yes.
that has designed PAPs to actually work on this interoperability platform to enable financial institutions, banks, telcos to integrate so people can, pay across borders without, real time and at a very low cost. I think that's what Afreximbank does through PAPs. But I agree that we need the private sector, we need banks, we need fintech to invest and exploit these opportunities to come up with new business models that will be relevant for our people.
Hey?
Well, I offer the perspective that entrepreneurs as non-state actors are the biggest missing piece. I don't know any economy in the world where regulators led the innovation and growth of the economies. And what you want to see that entrepreneurs rise to the plate, step up, do the needed work to begin to have conversations about how these things happen. Because innovation often leads policy, not the other way around. So we have to figure out, you have excellent forums like this, soft power. In Africa, we say we don't shout, we whisper. You quietly go and sit down and have these conversations in ways which you can engage people, get behind all the fears and begin to form the collaborations.
Thank you. Zelda?
I agree with everything that's been said, specifically on the Afrexim point. But I think there's also an opportunity for the Africa Secretariat as well in the coming years. You know, if we are going to take that continental free trade agreement seriously, then there is definitely a role for the Secretariat to play in bringing the economies together and pulling things forward. So I think that might be one to watch.
Thank you. We have a minute, and let me find a way to answer the question myself. And the answer is that on the 5th of July this year, there's a symposium in Accra. It's been organized by the Africa Prosperity Network. Our partners include GSMA, including MTN, I believe Airtel, Telecel, all of them. Afri-Exim Bank is part of it. AFDB is part of it. ECA is part of it. Even UNDP Africa is part of it. Smart Africa is part of it. And what we're doing, all the stakeholders, including associations of SMEs, will be meeting at the Labadi Beach Hotel in Accra to have a symposium to make sure that the conversation at the mid-year AU summit on between July 17th and July 22nd in Accra would be focused on what can be achieved in terms of interoperability. So all the stakeholders will be there, okay, to have this conversation and to let the politicians know that if they are serious about intra-African trade, about a single market, then they should allow interoperability to work. The regulators will all be there. The central banks will all be there. It started in Accra about 2 weeks ago in the 3i Summit. It will continue and will actually be consolidated with a document that will be presented to the AU heads of states. I believe they meet 21st and 22nd of July. So I hope that answers your question. Now, for this wonderful panelists, I think, what can I say? They've done wonderfully well in addressing the issue of how to achieve continent-wide interoperability. It is important, especially for the SMEs. Over 50% of adults in Africa last year somehow managed to trade in the digital space. That shows how big it is for us. Okay, over 750 million people are here in that space where mobile money is concerned. It is going to be big, and it is the way to achieve prosperity on our continent, bringing us closer. So thank you very much. Thank you, Africa Soft Power, for the opportunity. Thank you.